Hello and welcome to the show. Now we'll start by apologising. Unfortunately, the replay from the first race didn't save for anybody. The lobby sort of crashed, disconnected everybody right at the end of the race, and nobody got a chance to save the replay. Normally, if it does that, at least someone managed to stay connected long enough to save it. But yeah, this time out, with 20 plus people, nobody could get the replay saved. Is the joys of Forza servers sometimes. Is a shame. Is unfortunately not very much that I can do about that one. So yeah, I don't have the replay from the first race. So we have to start with the second round that went to Yas Marina. We were using B-Class 70's cars for this particular event. We're using the north layout of Yas. Turn 1 is often quite hectic here, relatively wide corner this, and a lot of cars trying to fit into the tarmac there. A few vehicles taking to the runoff area is probably a wise idea with the amount of chaos going on. A Cosmo gets very sideways, uses the rear of his car to slightly tap the rear of my Escort. Big twitch from the Mazda. Fortunately, with the way that he kind of slid the car, it actually saved me in the end with, yeah, a little bit of luck on that one. We all made it through the opening corners. Unfortunately, as we scramble through the chicane, the luck wouldn't last. Up ahead, an Alpine clipped a curb, got twitchy and spun the car ahead of the onrushing pack. Combine that with plumes of smoke, you just couldn't see cars quite where they were. There was a lot of panic here. You saw me taking massive avoiding action on the outside. A few cars, I think, followed me around there as well, just to try and avoid. Some vehicles did get caught up in it. It's a shame it can happen, though, if a car spins at the front of the field with everybody trying to get into that hairpin. Yeah, one of those things that can happen. I was going 3 wide with some skylines up towards the hairpin, going through the middle. Actually managed to fend off one of them around the outside at the hairpin. The Buick had mighty straight line speed, but was struggling through the turns, and I spotted a gap in my Escort and fired my car up the inside through the final turn. Now, as you can imagine, in the early laps there was plenty of shuffling about. There was the odd bump here and there around the hairpin. This can often be a little bit of a fiddly track to build cars for. Certainly, you want some decent straight line speed. It's a relatively long straight here. However, there are some quite slow corners, some quite nasty turns, and a couple of very high-speed corners, sort of turn 2 and 3. Pretty fast. You want a lot of grip from these vehicles for them corners. So, yeah, an interesting balance when it comes to cars here. This Corolla was very much in the thick of it, with mostly muscle cars and much larger vehicles all around it as we round the final turn. The Camaro tries to go around the outside of the Toyota, runs out of road a little bit, can't actually match the Corolla's acceleration. The Toyota has a look at the cars ahead, but the Skyline is battling with, I think it's a Firebird. It's racing for position through there. You just can't. Going 3 wide when cars are already positioned like that is not necessarily the most sensible of ideas, and wisely the Corolla backs out of it, gets a big slide around this next corner. Quite a commonplace to see cars having some big oversteering moments and having to take a little bit of avoiding action. The muscle cars behind were having a scrap, the Camaro, have a look up the inside of another vehicle. Towards the front, and we had a Ford Capri, a mighty fast Ford Capri in a straight line, but it was a handful through the corners as my Escort breezes around the outside. It's not very often you make a pass that easily around the outside of the chicane. That's just how much grip I had in the Escort compared to the Capri. The Aston Martin, the V8 Vantage, goes around the outside of the hairpin as well. But now we come to this long straight. The Capri just mullers the Aston Martin. My Escort fast accelerating didn't actually have very good top-end speed, but yeah, nothing was a match for the Capri in a straight line. The thing is, when it got to the corners, it struggled. When he did manage to get it stopped for this hairpin, the King Cobra can drive clean around the outside. The Cobra can put the power down to the road better, can carry more speed through this final turn. And it's taken 2 corners, and my Escort is right there, back behind the Capri. I actually get a very, very good run off of the final turn. I did like this Escort with its incredible acceleration. The Capri had nowhere to go, got a little bit forced to the outside at turn 1 and just doesn't have the grip. You can go around the outside of the first turn. It is quite difficult, and when you have so little grip compared to the cars you're racing against, yeah, the Capri was in trouble through the turns. The Aston Martin making the most of the opportunity as well. And yeah, while the Capri was very quick in a straight line, just didn't have the control through the corners. Further back, and the field was getting relatively spread out here. There was kind of big muscle car battle was going on towards the mid-pack. This Hemi Cuda managing to outdrag a Camaro, but the Hemi couldn't manage to get it stopped into the hairpin. The Chevy would fight back, very close between the two cars there, but the Camaro would get the position as they round that final turn. Got to be careful though, it's another relatively long straight down the start-finish lines. Make sure you defend your position. The Camaro does, sticks to the inside of the road, forces the Hemi to try and go around the outside, and as we already saw, he didn't have the grip to make that one stick. There was a great battle going on over second place between the King Cobra, Toyota Celica, my Escort, and the Aston Martin. My Escort had phenomenal acceleration off of the turns, which was making it a pain in the arse for the Aston Martin to get past. The Aston much quicker around these corners. The Celica, the fastest of the lot around the turns, but lacked straight line speed. I managed to spot an opportunity to get up the inside into turn one, and the Aston Martin was only too keen to follow me through for that position. We're all running a little bit wide. You can see us fighting the cars. The Celica got fantastic speed through those fast changes of direction, but it's just a little bit too far back to try anything into the chicane. And the leader in the Mazda Cosmo had made a mistake, and it was now going to become a 5-car battle for the lead. I'd run a little bit wide, got my car slightly caught on the curb, put the Aston Martin alongside. The Celica was had a look at the inside, but was no match for the acceleration of the Escort, while up ahead of us, the King Cobra was having a go at trying to get past the Cosmo. Similar story with that, the King Cobra just wasn't quite close enough to have a look. Further back, there were some good battles going on. Another Escort was a little bit early on the brakes coming into the hairpin. The Skyline came from a huge way back, managed to get the car stopped, but in doing so, overran the corner a little bit too much. The Escort's trying to do a cutback again. Another Escort with some decent acceleration off of the turns, but can't quite keep his car alongside as we run down towards turn one. The Escort forced to have a look around the outside, and it's not really where you want the car to be particularly. Then we come up through these fast corners. The Nissan a little bit on two wheels. The Escort here I think might have been on standard suspension. It looked quite bouncy. That I would imagine is quite scary around there. At the front, and as we came onto the final lap, it was still a 5-way battle for the lead. I was frantically trying to fend off the Aston Martin. To be fair, if we hadn't been fighting so hard, we may well have kind of intervened a little bit more with this King Cobra versus Cosmo battle at the front. And of course, the more me and the Aston Martin fought, the easier it was for the Celica to keep up with us. I had a dive up the inside of the Aston Martin coming into the chicane to try and go around the outside of it, ran out of road a little bit. The Mustang was catching up massively through these turns. Actually, surprisingly good handling car. The King Cobra, I was impressed. I have been impressed by this car a few times actually. In versus the community, they do tend to, or they can do quite well, but he wasn't quite close enough to the Cosmo at this stage. I was busy out dragging the V8 Vantage down the main straight while the Celica was just lagging a little bit behind. The Mustang had a lot of work to do coming into the final corners if it was going to take a victory. It was good under brakes, could carry great speed through the corners. I was defending for my life in third place, forcing the Aston Martin around the long way, and while the Cobra was catching, it was catching through these final corners. You see the size of the gap that it made up through just those two turns. It was a little bit too far back, would have to settle for second place. So Cosmo would take victory in round one from the King Cobra. My Escort coming home in third, ahead of the Aston Martin in fourth, with the Celica rounding out the top five. Our third and final race would go to the Hockenheim short circuit, a track that I adore, and a track that often produces some great racing, many overtaking opportunities around this circuit. Turn one though, a little bit scary. I think an Escort either got turned or put a wheel on the curb. Either can do a similar thing. The curves around here are vicious. They are absolutely vicious buggers. The Plymouth that we were following at the moment started well down the order, but actually made a relatively good start just by driving cleanly, by keeping out of trouble, make up quite a lot of positions here, and found himself in a little bit of no man's land. But that's not necessarily a bad thing at the start of these races, especially when we've got a 24-car grid. Just making sure you get a clean start is always useful, and you'll certainly pick up a fair few positions. at the front, and it was a Holden that was leading the way. He was trying to be chased down by a Renault Alpine. Said Alpine, though, was coming under threat from a Hemi Cuda as we come down towards turn 1. The Hemi goes up the inside, but is going to overshoot the corner. I get a huge two-wheel moment in the Escort. It's a great cutback from the Alpine to keep hold of his second place. That Alpine looks so tiny compared to these giant muscle cars around it. Rather intimidating when you're in such a little car with a Hemi Cuda looking pretty much through your rear window. The Hemi, decent straight line speed, but around this track it couldn't quite keep up. Runs a tad wide in the Alpine. There's got so much corner speed he could get himself to a little bit of safety further back, and it was rather hectic here, as I think a couple of Escorts were fighting, and Aston Martin was busy going around the outside of the Escorts. Another King Cobra was making good progress, goes around the outside of 2 cars. This place that's a seriously tough corner to get an overtake around the outside. It's a tough corner just driving around the circuit. You see many cars end up out in the gravel trap, but to overtake 2 cars around the outside there, that's some really good going. Another King Cobra that was being mighty impressive as a Capri squeezes its way past an Escort up ahead. I had made my way up into a third, thanks to a couple of mistakes from cars ahead, trying to now find a way past the Holden Tirana. This thing was doing pretty damn well, though. I got myself to the inside, but it had more than enough speed and more than enough grip to fend me off forward. Now, as we come to the hairpin, I wasn't quite close enough to have a look. I knew I had a slightly quicker car overall, but yeah, he defended for a couple of laps, made it really rather awkward for my Escort to try and find a way past, and all the meanwhile, the leader up ahead, I think it's a Mercury Cougar, was just managing to pull away that little bit. Again, back to the mid-pack, we had a Dodge Challenger, a Corvette, and a BMW fighting over position. The Corvette pushing his luck a little bit too much. I think he might put a rear wheel on the grass, and then you're never going to stop. The Dodge to the inside, the BMW, though, not giving up, and if you can keep it around the outside, it will put you on the inside for the hairpin. The Dodge runs too deep into the hairpin, gives the BMW plenty of opportunity to keep his car there. If you do run wide in that turn, sometimes you can get a nice run off the corner. But so the Challenger is just that little bit too far back to have a go. Both the cars get into trouble around the final turn. The Dodge gets a very, very big oversteering moment, and the Corvette that had fallen off the road 30 seconds ago was now right back into the fight. You see the amount of time that is so easily lost just by fighting too wide for 4 or 5 corners. You can see how much time is lost. This group would remain close throughout the majority of the race. In fact, the Aston Martin V8 Vantage was trying desperately to fend off a Mercury Cougar and was being caught by another Challenger as they round the final corner. The Mercury gets himself to the inside. Turn 1, though, is a scary place to go through an overtake very fast. Not too much in the way of braking. They make it too wide, though, through the corner. Very nicely done, very cleanly. The Mercury still on the inside. The Dodge gets a fantastic drive through the turn, but is a little bit too shallow a line around turn number 2 and has to yield in the end. The Mercury getting the position with it's a great overtake. They gave each other plenty of space to make it around there cleanly. And then the Mercury goes and throws it all away immediately on the next corner by running wide, gets a big oversteering moment, and the Aston Martin is back ahead. Mercury very nearly losing a position to the Dodge. Again, we see cars going too wide. Having said that, that is one of the scarier corners on the track to be going too wide for. Plenty of people were going too wide through it, and on the most part, they're actually doing a really good job of surviving it, and the Mercury would remain ahead of the Dodge. I would eventually clear the Holden after he made a mistake. This would be another race-long battle over third place between the Holden, the Hemi Cuda, the Renault Alpine, and a Dodge Challenger. The Renault very, very quick through the corners, the rest of them faster in a straight line and a little bit faster accelerating, although if the Renault could get a good line out of a corner, carry a lot of momentum around the turn, it could put the frighteners on these muscle cars for acceleration. We're again coming down towards turn 1. The Renault gets a little bit of a squeeze from the Hemi Cuda, runs wide, and that is why you don't mess with the curbs here at Hockenheim. even if you don't run over them, even if you're not doing anything silly, you bounce across them and you get it wrong, spits the car sideways. The Alpine driver did a fantastic job of keeping that car from having a huge spin. It'd be so easy to have a big accident on that curb. As I said, these guys remain close for the entire race. The Mercury would find a way back past the Aston Martin, but didn't really shake the Vantage. The Aston, though, was now having to try and defend from a Dodge and the Plymouth as they were looking for ways past. And as soon as you have to start defending, you're going to see the Aston Martin struggling that little bit more. Ran wide through the first corner, which is not what you want to be doing here. That will put the Dodge on the inside. The Plymouth's trying to follow him through. The Aston Martin does a fantastic job of keeping that around the outside of the Dodge. I thought for sure that Challenger was going to make the pass stick, but he couldn't quite. And then the Aston Martin has the inside for the next corner, and while the Dodge is good through the turns, it wasn't quite fast enough to overcome that V8 Vantage through there, and again it's just not quite in the right place. All the while that GTX is sat there waiting and watching and biding his time to find an opportune moment at the front, and it was a Mercury Cougar that was leading the way. Had about a 200-foot lead. We were trading fastest lap times until the very end of the race. He ran wide. The first mistake he'd made all race, and I spotted an opportunity with my Escort. Could I make the most of it? Unfortunately, I actually had a really scruffy final sector through here. I got a bit too much oversteer coming out of the hairpin and ran a tad wide through these final corners. I couldn't quite capitalise on the mistake. The Escort was actually quite a hard car to drive, quite an oversteer, certainly for me, quite an oversteery vehicle. Yeah, not the easiest of cars to drive. It was very quick though. I think me and the Mercury's fastest laps were a hundredth or two apart. It wasn't very much. The battle for third was still raging on this final lap. The Holden was holding on to the position. The Alpine had got himself into a little bit of trouble. Slow through that incredibly fast corners. He was now trying to fend off the Hemi Cuda. The King Cobra had caught up to this battle as well. It was getting involved. The Cuda put a win on the grass that spat him off the road. The Challenger was looking but couldn't get close enough. He thought about having a dive up the inside into these final couple of corners. Wasn't far enough alongside. The Holden did leave him a little bit of space. It wasn't enough. The Challenger couldn't do anything about the other Tirana. So the Holden would take third ahead of the Challenger, the Alpine, and the King Cobra. There were certainly some fantastic battles in that final race. Some sort of race-long battles with groups of 3 or 4 cars was pretty impressive. Would have been interesting to see an actual race between me and the Mercury at the front. As I said, both our cars are very quick. We got our speed in very different ways. The Escort was a little bit more difficult to drive, certainly, than that Mercury. Slightly screwed my chances at the end of the race. I did like this Escort though. It was a very different car from a normal sort of vehicle that I would drive, quite oversteery, and as I said, quite a difficult one to keep control of. But if you got it right, it certainly was mighty, mighty fast. Anyway, that is it for this video. The next FailRace versus the community shall be held on Thursday, the 31st of March. We are going to be going racing with D-Class cars with 4-cylinder engines. If you would like to sign up and take part in that event, then you can go to our forums. There will be a link in the description. Find the FailRace versus the community section, and you will be able to sign up in there. But that is it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.